Welcome, everyone. This is Robin Duncan, and this is our How to Be a Healer series. Today we are on Module 4.1. It is called Intro to Resourcing, and this is part of our EFT with the Source Technique online course. And these modules I'm sharing with you now are more at the basic level, but I'm really trying to give you some solid skills that you can put to work even today. Today, in our Diary of a Healer series, I'd like to share a story, which I call a miracle story because it was quite miraculous. It's called Fear of Bridges. And it was probably 2 or 3 decades ago, but I was really trying to hone my own techniques, and I was offering my services for free at a place called Learning Light Foundation. It's in Anaheim, California. I don't even know if they are still there, but at the time it was a very friendly place, and there was lots of classrooms and ways to learn some of this material that you may not find any other place. And so they asked me to come and do a demonstration in front of a group of people and also to work one-on-one with people. I think I've shared some of that before. So I'd been working all morning one-on-one with people just for free, 20 minutes a person. They would sit in front of me, give me a topic, and I would use EFT prayer tapping and a little bit of my source technique to help find the hidden root cause of the problem. And then I would use the EFT tapping to help them release the emotional charge. And it really was helpful in terms of giving me the experience as a practitioner because it was free. I didn't have any pressure on me. There's still a little pressure because people sit in front of you. They have some expectation that you are going to help them. But there I was, one after the other after the other. So all of a sudden I get a tap on my shoulder and they said, "Oh, it's time for you to go do this quick demonstration in this room. There's a group of people there, and we'd like you to talk about EFT and how it works." But the person before you was late in finishing. So instead of starting at 3, you are now going to start at about 3:10. And I had until 3:30. So I had 20 minutes with these lovely people in this group. And I go in there, and what I had learned as a practitioner is to not decide in advance what I would do or how this would go, which my old life as a CFO and a CPA, that would have just terrified me. I could never walk into a boardroom and just wing it. So I knew I wanted to share EFT, what it did, how you could use it. I knew the basics of what I was going to be talking about, but I always leave room for higher consciousness to shine through. So I go into this room. I'm already 10 minutes robbed of my own time with these people. And so I start telling them about EFT and I'm showing them the tapping points. And all of a sudden, out of my mouth, here it comes again, Holy Spirit right through my mouth says, "How about if everyone in here picks their biggest fear and let's tap it down?" And after I said that, I thought, why did I say that? I have 20 minutes with these people. I've already used at least 5 or 10 in terms of, explaining EFT, what it is, how you use it, the tapping points. I went through it real quickly, but I just rolled with it. But you can imagine that's pretty daunting. I have, maybe about 10 or 12 minutes left. And I'm addressing this group of people, and I have asked them to hold in their mind their greatest fear. Well, we went ahead and went through a nice tapping sequence as a group, and I had people measure, what number they were at very quickly, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 10, 8, 10, So we had some high numbers in the room. We did a nice round together, and everybody started coming down, and they were amazed. Actually, even in one round of EFT, those numbers started coming down. But this nice lady sitting over across from me, she was actually shaking. And I thought, oh my goodness, I need to do something about this because she's shaking in her seat. And I asked the group, would it be okay if I, check on her? Because, even though we were in the middle of a group exercise, obviously she needed a little extra help. And everybody was like, sure, yes, help her, really nice, loving people. So I went over to her. I kneeled down in front of her and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I have a terrible fear of bridges." And she said, "Even thinking about it throws me into the shakes." She goes, "I can't think about bridges without shaking." And I thought, oh boy, here we go. Now I have about 7 or 8 minutes left. And I've got this person with this awful, terrifying fear and phobia of bridges. So I thought I better get a move on. So I started moving very quickly and I used my source technique. I used some resourcing to get to the root of the problem. And what I found out very quickly is that she became very terrified of bridges, mostly from one incident. She was crossing a bridge, and for whatever reason, she thought she was going to drive off the side. She became terrified of driving off the side, and that fright got inside of her. And so we went ahead and we tapped that particular issue because that was very obviously a problem for her, just this fear of driving off the side of the bridge. And, there wasn't a lot of time to find why or where it came from. So I just kind of rolled with it all. And her fear did come down from like 100 on a 10-point scale down to maybe a 20. So that one was a nice big gain for us. And then I just kept probing and I said, I would like you to imagine there's a bridge in front of you. And she said, "Oh, no, no." And I said, "Okay, tell me why not." So you're looking at this bridge, you're thinking about driving across. What's coming up for you? And she said, "Well, I can't go through the gate. If there was a gate, a toll booth or something, I can't do that." And I said, "And you can't do that because you'll learn that's a part of resourcing. You can't go through that gate because," and she's like, "Well, I'll be trapped because once I get on the other side of that toll booth, I can't turn around." Okay. So we tap that out. We use all the tapping points, even though I have this fear of going through the toll booth and I'll be trapped and I can't turn around. I'm willing to choose peace. I'm willing to know. I said, "Do you believe in God?" "Yes, I do." "I'm willing to know I am divinely guided. I am safe and God is with me." This always helps people calm down. Just the memory of that is so helpful. So then I said, "Okay, imagine that bridge in front of you. Now what?" And she said, "Well, I think I might be able to go through the gate," but she said, "I can't go onto the bridge." And I said, "And you can't go onto the bridge because," and then she said, "Well, it's just too narrow." And then here came the fear again that I would drive over the side. Okay. So then we do a lot of tapping on that, even though I have this fear that when I get on the other side of that toll booth and I might just drive off the side, I'm willing to know that I have no interest in driving off the side of a bridge. And it's very unlikely this would happen because I have no desire to drive off the side of any bridge or any road for that matter. Sometimes I couple things so it's not so lasered in, so specific on one thing. I might say, "I'm willing to see this about this person and everyone." It just spreads it out so the ego can't hold you in that very specific fear. So anyway, we went over the driving off the side again, and she couldn't get through the toll booth. And then her fear was she couldn't get to the other side, once she got on the bridge. And so we tapped out the fear of not being able to get to the other side. And then, maybe it would come up again. And then there was the fear of the future. If you recall, once she's done with her fears of the past, what does the ego do? It hops over the bridge and it goes into the fear of the future. So now she had a fear of, well, what if I come up to a bridge and all of this comes back? Because she was feeling pretty good all of a sudden. All the shaking had stopped, and the whole crowd is just watching and amazed by this because it was so fast. And ultimately, we got to the end of it all, and we ended right at 3:30, which was my time to end. And I said, "Okay, you've got this bridge in front of you. How do you feel about it?" And she goes, "I would cross it." And the whole crowd just started cheering and they were super excited for her. So you see, a phobia, even one that makes you go into shivers and convulsions, can actually be addressed just like that. So today, as we go into resourcing, it's one of those ways to very rapidly get into the hidden root causes of a problem. Who knew that her fear of bridges had all these, I call them table legs. The tabletop is like problem itself, the fear of bridges. And then there's all these table legs holding up that fear. And one of them is, I can't go through a toll booth. Another one is, I'll get trapped on the other side. Another one is, I think I'll drive off the side of that bridge like a crazy person. And I'm like, well, you probably won't, right? Do you really want to drive off the side of that bridge? No, I don't. Well, let's just go with that. You really don't want to drive off the side of that bridge. So we tap that in, and then the fear of getting to the other side. And it was actually quite comical because every time I would help her drop something, she would come up with another table leg. But we want to be really good listeners and allow our clients to use their words to describe what's going on for them. You know, if I thought, okay, she has this fear of bridges, I might have decided without any input from her that maybe she's just afraid of crossing over, an empty space. That never came up. If I had to guess, I might guess that. So realize as a practitioner, if we guess, we're probably wrong. Now, if you're very intuitive, which everyone here probably is, I am too, and we will be guided. And sometimes we get a hit or a hunch, and it's probably correct. But the very best thing we can do is to draw it out of our client. Because if we just come into the room with all these answers and we have all the right things on the right list and we're the all-knowing one, it really is quite disempowering to our client. So even if you know the answer as clear as day, I always want you to try to help your client come up with it first, because then there's tremendous buy-in, there's ownership, there's a collaboration going on. I might see a whole scene in my mind as the healer of where she got this fear. I might see that maybe as a child, they went over a bridge and maybe their car got stuck. Maybe her dad got out of the car and he looked over the side of the bridge. Maybe she had a terrible fright that her father was going to fall off this bridge. And maybe that fear is driving every other fear. Maybe I see all of that. So in this case, what I might do is say to my client, was there anything in childhood? Do you remember anything about bridges, going over bridges? I might give them a little nudge in a certain direction, but say she says no. Then I might be willing to say, I get a sense that maybe there was an experience. I try to not make it so exact and so precise, because it's disempowering that if it's her life, her fear, her bridge situation, and then I come in, the all-knowing one, I just don't think that feels very good. So I like to go in giving them lots of room to kind of find their way into their own inner healer. So if you can do that, I think you will do yourself such a great favor, and your client too. Well, today I'm going to show you yet another video, but it's already done. It's called the Intro to ReSourcing. And today, as we look at this video, what I'd like to do is remind you that it's more theory today. I'd like you to kind of sit back and kind of see how this works, take it in conceptually, kind of the process, and then in the next class or two, I'll be breaking it down into more structured slides, components, so you know what those exact steps are. I also sent you the notes, which is just a nice list, especially on that first page, a nice list telling you how to go about resourcing. But I'd like you to just listen to the video, how I go through it, and get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish. Really get that in your mind and heart. And then when you hear those steps, it's just going to make so much sense. Otherwise, it might seem complicated. It might seem like you don't know what to do or what to say or what to ask. But you'll find if you know what the goal is and you're willing to be patient with yourself, with your client, your divine wisdom is going to give you hunches all along the way, and it's going to keep you on track. So let's go ahead now and open up this video. Here we go. Welcome, everyone. This is Robin Duncan, and this is free training for healers. Feel free to ask questions as we go, raise your hand, or try to write something in that chat box. I'll try to watch for that. If I miss it, just wave me down.
Let me know there's something out there. This is such a joy for me to share with you some of the techniques that I use all the time. And I love seeing some of these faces out there that I've known for years and years, and they're probably still using these techniques, right, Anne, right, Jamie, right? All these people that have learned this so long ago, and here they are back for more. These people are out there just doing the work in the world, and I so appreciate that. I spent about 20 years just teaching practitioner classes, professional certification classes in hypnotherapy, advanced hypnosis, sound therapy, EFT with the source technique, life coaching, guided imagery, self hypnosis. I could see Anne just going, "Yep, I did that. Yep, I did that. Yep, I did that." Right. And it is so much fun to learn these tools because I believe there is a healer within each one of us. And if you have some good, simple, solid tools, you will find that you can help anyone. One of my greatest treasures is that when my own family or my own children are struggling with something, that it's when these tools can be so helpful. And it's wonderful as a parent to have tools that you can help your family with. I remember one time just working with my little son as he was going into elementary school, and he had a quiz that day, so he was very nervous about the whole thing. But the night before, I had done a little guided meditation with him, and it was all about a jungle playground where he was safe and happy and everything worked and everything went well. And I had anchored in the word playground. And he was sitting next to me in the car, and he was saying, I have this quiz. I don't know how it will go. And I said, "Now, where is your hand?" And he handed me his hand, and I squeezed his little fingers gently, and I said, "Playground." And he just beamed, and all of a sudden, all that fear left his face, and he just went off and took his quiz and had no trouble at all. You'll find that there are so many simple things we can do that are highly effective. And through this series, I'd like to teach you so many of those techniques that you can just practice at home and for your own enjoyment. I am asking you to not use these techniques professionally unless you are certified. So just because I'm teaching you very in-depth techniques, I don't have the opportunity to make sure you know what you're doing or how you're doing it. The work we do usually involves working with people in some kind of stress or trauma. And the last thing you want to do is practice on somebody that's in the middle of a deep trauma and trigger them and not know how to help them move out of that experience. So, of course, if that's something you would like to learn more about, that's something I help you to do. And then you get certified, and then I can make sure that you know what you're doing so that you end up being a great blessing to this person instead of something else. There were times when I have worked with other people and I was the client, and they would take me back to a very difficult time, and they didn't know effectively how to help me move that trauma out of my mind and heart and body. And they kind of left me there. And this has happened about 3 times. And then they bring me back to the normal waking state, and I was kind of angry because all of a sudden they had me remember all of these things, but they didn't know how to walk me through and out the other side. So, through these training classes, if you do decide to go further and get certified, these are the things I help you do so that you always leave your clients, family, friends, whoever you're working with, you leave them in a really great place that is better than where they started. Tonight, I'm teaching a technique. It's part of our EFT with the Source technique course and also my hypnotherapy course. I teach you how to do something called ReSourcing. And ReSourcing is one of 5 different ways to identify the root cause of a problem. So, this is just one of those ways. And I tried to give you a pretty nice layout of what that looks like. We'll cover it fairly quickly. Tonight, I am just letting you know how it works. We're not going to move the trauma tonight because I'd like to do this in bite-sized pieces. So ideally, we'll have another training set where we take what we have identified And then we will move that trauma together, and you can see how good that feels. But I like to think of resourcing with a capital S under that word source there, because not only are we resourcing the problem and finding out where it's coming from, what is the root cause, but we are also going to the source to get to the source within us. So I think that capital S is real important. And this is about getting to the root cause of a problem. So much of the time we think the problem we are dealing with is the problem. You would think so, right? If you are in a situation where you are sick with an illness, you think it's the illness that's the problem. But what you'll find out through these training classes is that it's always emotionally based. Everything is the healing of the mind. And when the mind is healed, the body represents that healing. I remember working with a woman at a little fair that I went to. I used to go to a place called Learning Light, and I would sit there on Saturdays for free, and I would just work with people for about 20 minutes at a time. And I would practice EFT with the source technique. And I learned how to very quickly isolate what the problem was. I only had 20 minutes per person. And then I would help them try to move as much of that as I could in the 20 minutes. And a lady was watching me from across the room, and she was one of the vendors. And she said, at break time, do you think I could talk to you about something? And I said, sure. So I talked with her a little bit, and we identified that she had a real serious case of sciatica, and she had had it for 55 years. And she had no relief and could never find a way through the pain. So she thought, what the heck? She watched people, they kept walking away from my booth looking better, feeling better. And so she said, what can we do? And I asked her a few questions, not much different than what we will do here tonight. And what I figured out in just a few minutes is that when she was a child, she had some really tragic things happen. And she felt really unloved, unappreciated, not valued. And so this kind of deep sadness and grief had set into her body. And then now she was experiencing this sciatica pain, and it was just running all through her leg and body. And it had been going on for 55 years. She had been on Vicodin for the longest time, really having a tough time with it all. Well, once we identify what the real root cause is, and then we apply the EFT or the emotional freedom techniques, some people call it tapping. You've probably seen some of that. We do the tapping, but the tapping is not the best part. The best part is when you apply tapping on the root of the problem. So we did some tapping, identifying what she had told me, what she had talked about, almost telling her story about her childhood experiences. And within, I would say, 10 minutes, all of her sciatic pain left. And she marveled. She just was like, where did it go? Literally, where did it go? And I said, well, the body is mirroring when you are in stress, when you are carrying this emotional burden for so long, your body is not intended to carry that burden. And so your body is clearly overwhelmed. I call it your emotional vault. And so her emotional vault was full. The body's trying to process all this. It can't do that. And so pain ends up being the effect of carrying that emotional burden. And I was able to check in with her about 5 weeks later, and she said it was still gone, completely gone. And I started to think back in those days, shouldn't everybody learn this? It's so simple, really. And we don't always have perfect results because sometimes people are not ready to let go of the problem. You might think everybody wants to be healed, everybody wants to feel good, but sometimes there's fear around that. That if I stop having this pain, it could be that, my partner might expect more from me. Or if I stop having this pain, it could be that my disability income will go away. So all these fears flood their mind sometimes But of course, I teach you about that in the courses because before you leave a session with one of your clients or family or friends, when you're getting to the end of that session, we always like to check in with fears about the future. One thing I've learned after doing thousands of sessions is that our ego, the one that is working so hard against us, at first it tries to hold you in the past, everything that went on in the past, what you did wrong, what you didn't do right, what you should have done better, what somebody else should have done better. It's all about shoulds and the past and the guilt and the grievances. And when all of that starts getting cleared away, the ego hops the fence of the present, hops over the fence, and it starts going after the future. And it starts bringing up fear of the future. So we have to know that as practitioners, that even if we clear away some great big burden for one of our clients, they're very likely to hop that fence in their mind. And then their mind might say, through the ego's voice, well, what if it comes back? What if when I leave this office, like everything comes rushing back? What will I do? Or what will I do about my disability income? Or what will I tell my partner about what happened here? All of these things. So we have to address both when we're covering a session. As I do these free training modules, I try to add in as much as I can. So, be aware of that. I will send you a replay. It may sound like I'm kind of scooping all over the place, but over time, as my longtime graduates know, eventually it just all makes sense and gels together and you really get the big picture. So don't try to follow me necessarily, but follow the steps on the worksheets I give you. But along the way, I'm going to be adding in a lot of jewels and just things to remember. You might want to jot those things down because I feel like divine guidance kicks in and it wants me to mention certain things that I might have not thought of before. So hopefully you'll give me that flexibility to add those things in. Tonight, as we learn about resourcing, we're going to go through this document that's in the chat box over there, and I will send it out with the video replay. So let's say that this is you or someone else. It could be you're trying to resource a problem that you have or one that you're working through with someone else. And this is the process. So the first thing is you want to identify the problem or the concern. Pretty simple. Some people might come to you and they have a migraine headache that won't go away, or they have sciatic nerve pain, or they have financial problems, or conflict in a relationship, or they want to lose weight, or they have a habit or an addiction, or they can't sleep at night. We know what problems look like, right? So there's any different kind of problem out there. That's okay. These techniques literally work with any problem. Someone could say, I've had a brain tumor since I was 6. Well, I don't know if these things will help, but I'd certainly like to try. If somebody is 65 and they've had a brain tumor since they were 6 and they've always had trouble with it, why wouldn't we want to try? It only takes maybe, half an hour or an hour, and it could be that we get a hold of what's causing it, and it could be that they could be free of it. And I've seen many miracles in this work. So my mind is wide open to what can happen in a session. The one thing before we begin, I'd like you to remember is that you are not the healer, even though we talk about the healer within you. God is the healer, in my humble observation. God is the healer. It takes the burden off of your shoulders. You're more of a translator. You're listening to that voice of guidance within you. You're communicating that guidance to the person in front of you, and you're doing the best you can. And when you get stuck, you'll have tools and tips and techniques to rely on that will tell you what to do. But one of the best things you can do is just pause and say, God, what do I do? How do I help? I'm going to tell you one quick story of a man that I had worked with. Before him, I had worked with his wife, and she brought him in next. I call those drag alongs, when the wife drags her husband through the door and you could tell he did not want to be there. But he had a lot of things going on, and he had a lot of foot pain. He had a neck brace on. He was a tall man, and he came into the office, and I could tell right away he was very uncomfortable being there. But God bless him, he showed up, right? So here she brought him, and she was like, "Help him," you know. And I thought, well, I was new at all of this, but I was always game to see what I could do to help and what God could help me do to help them. And so we sat down, and I won't go into all the details, but he told me that he had had this terrible foot pain. And I said, on a 1 to 10, how intense was it? And he said, well, right now it's about a 200. I go, okay, that tells me a lot as a practitioner. It's not just a 10, it's a 200. So we know we have a lot of foot pain going on here. And I said, well, how long has this been going on? And he said, about 5 years. And, right away, any normal person would go, what happened 5 years ago? So, of course, I asked, what happened 5 years ago? And he goes, uh, well, I did get injured. He said, I was jumping over a fence. I came down. I hit my foot. I slipped. I got injured. And I thought, oh, so then already I'm thinking, well, this must be something. But you know what? It's not. So I warn you here that sometimes we draw conclusions because it looks like it makes sense, but it's actually leading us to a conclusion. So I thought, well, it must be this injury that he had. So I started asking more about that. And we tried applying some of the tapping on this incident because he said I was so stupid. I fell. I shouldn't have done that. I could hear a lot of self judgment. So we're trying to clear away all that self judgment. And then I said, well, how is the pain right now? And he said, it's the same. And I thought, oh dear, because I felt like I was just failing miserably. I was very new at all this. And I thought, wow, it always comes down when we do these things. And what I know is when the numbers don't come down in terms of the pain, it means that we're not on the right aspect. We're not on the right route. So I sat there, and thank goodness I know how to pray at least. And so I said, God, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And his wife is sitting back behind me, kind of watching over everything. And he's still in a lot of pain. And I got a very strong thought that just said, ask him about childhood experiences. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a reach. I used to argue with God quite a bit. And so I thought, well, God, I can ask him, but it sounds like I'm shooting darts at the wall. I don't want to be that person, somebody just guessing and throwing darts. And I heard it again. Ask him about childhood experiences. And so I did. Ultimately, he tells me about this childhood experience where he got his feet burned. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think probably this is the root of this pain. And then I asked him more about it, and he said it was no big deal. And I kept thinking, no big deal. Like his feet were burned. And he just kept saying it's no big deal. You could tell he didn't really want me to come near it or talk about it. And I persisted. I said, it's no big deal. Do you remember if you were in high school or elementary school? And he goes, I don't know. You could just tell there was a whole defense going on here. And his wife pops in, and she said, it's elementary school. I said, okay, okay. I go, well, he said it's not a big deal. What happened after this injury? He goes, oh, I went to the hospital. I said, well, how long were you there? I don't know. And his wife pops in. There's always going to be some way you get through this. Like in this case, it was his wife. God helps us, right? So his wife says he was in the hospital. I think it was like 5 weeks, I think, because of this burn. I go, oh, this is significant, clearly, especially for a little kid. So then we started tapping on that incident. I asked him if that was okay, of course, and he said yes. And do you know he went from a 200 to a 4 in one 2-minute round of tapping? A 200 to a 4. And what was happening in his mind and heart is he had this injury, but he blamed himself for that injury. And then later in life, 5 years ago, he injured himself again, and all that pain and blame flooded back, and his feet were on fire all over again. You see, like when we hold that blame and that guilt and that pain, your body kicks back on you, and your body is the effect of those judgments against yourself. So if you want to see that pain go away, you can try to treat it at the level of the pain, but you're treating at the level of the problem, not at the level of the cause of the problem. Does that make sense? So once we addressed it at that level, everything shifted. But you see, I was a little perplexed myself because he's the one that said it started 5 years ago and he had this injury. So I'm going to tell you these things along the way because I don't want you to be tripped up like I was. Never assume you know anything. Like just keep following and listening and asking God and just letting yourself be fluid in this process. And if you get stuck, let it be and say, God, how do we get past this? What do you want me to do? How can I help? You're going to get a nudge or a thought, or it's going to come out of the other person. It's about being willing to be good at this. So let's go ahead and get started with resourcing some of the very same tools I used in that scenario. Getting to the root cause of the problem. We go ahead and identify the problem or the concern. So if you're working with someone, you would simply ask them, what is it that they're working on or, trying to improve? They'll let you know. And then once you have a sense of what that problem is, I want you to ask some general questions about it just to get an idea of what's going on and some of the more universal judgments that the person has about this issue. One of the questions I start with is who caused this problem? Remember, guilt is a big deal. Like when guilt is assigned, there's going to be punishment for somebody. So if they assign guilt to another person, do you know that they themselves can experience the pain? Because pain is the proof that the assignment of guilt was justified and they go together. So when we assign guilt, guilt and punishment go together like peanut butter and jelly, right? So when you assign guilt, you're very likely going to encourage some pain or punishment or delay or loss of income or so never assign guilt. Forgive, forgive, forgive every day. I like to ask who was involved in a particular situation. Maybe I was all by myself and I got injured. So I might think, well, I was the only one. Or there might have been a driver that hit me, and that's how I got injured. So I might have some judgments against that driver. Or maybe that driver was drunk when they hit me, and now I've got amplified judgments against that driver. All of this matters in our healing session because until those judgments are addressed and healed, neutralized, then the effects of the injury are not likely to move or leave until after the forgiveness has taken place. Where did this happen? It gives me a good idea as a practitioner. I try to ask questions until I have a good picture in my mind. It's almost like this. If you're sitting in the middle of a room and somebody is sitting over by the window, and it's a window you've never sat by, and you're asking them to describe to you what they see outside the window. And you're asking enough questions so that you feel that you have a good idea of what they're looking at outside the window. Some of my students will say, how do you know when to stop? And it's like, well, when I think I understand what it is they're talking about or what they see. So think of it that way. You're asking enough questions to just get a good idea of what we're looking at here. And I give you the questions in your materials, but of course, you might have questions of your own as well. So, where did this happen? It might have happened on a playground. That tells you maybe it's early childhood. It might have happened in your neighbor's apartment. So now, as a practitioner, I might be already thinking we have to maybe include the neighbor as part of the reason for this problem. It might have happened on a freeway. We might have to think about fear of driving as part of this. So I'm trying to put this puzzle together to understand where did these judgments get made against themselves. At some point in time through whatever transpired, this person that I'm working with, even if it's myself, made a decision against themselves. And I'm trying to find out where and what that decision was. Because if we can find that, that's like the root that needs to be pulled out and thrown out of the garden. When did this happen? Well, if it happened last Friday, I know that it's fresh. I know that it's probably pretty big, right? It might have happened 5 years ago, like for this guy. And if it's still very fresh and very big, I know it was a really big thing that happened for them. If it happened 25 years ago, it doesn't mean it's not big. It might be buried. And I might have to do a little more of my own techniques to kind of get them to bring it to the surface. So when it happened just tells me a lot about how much do they store it away. When I was asking this guy, were you in high school or elementary school when this happened? And he said, I don't know. Obviously, he doesn't want to know. He doesn't want to remember. I mean, most of us could at least isolate it to 0 to 10 or 11 to 20. You could hit the right decade. But if they don't want to know, that tells me it was so traumatizing. Do you see? Like, so we're kind of getting a sense of all this as we ask questions and we're asking God for help. And you will get a really good picture and you will become very good at helping people identify what's going on. What is your ego trying to convince you of through this problem? I added this recently because this is a Course in Miracles and it helps so much. So, in this case, let's say that the person has knee pain and now they can't walk very well. And what they've told me also is maybe they used to be an ice skater and maybe they did it as a profession. Maybe they were a competitive ice skater. So that's a bigger problem, right? Than just not being able to walk. If you can't walk and now you can't skate and that was your income, do you see there's more issues here? So we're not trying to overcomplicate it, but we have to be sure to include the things that matter. And just think about the things that would matter to you. Well, it would certainly matter to me if my knee pain was so bad I can't walk or I can't play with my kids or my grandkids, but it would especially matter to me if I couldn't earn my own income or compete or do. If it's life stopping, we have to treat it as a life stopper, not just a casual incident. So you're not communicating what you're thinking at this point. You're just taking information, but you're hearing a lot behind the scenes. You're hearing what the person is committed to. You're hearing how they feel about it. You're seeing in their face where they get a little charged, what they're talking about. And these are important things you might even jot down in your notes or put a little star next to the ones where they kind of really light up when they talk about it. I like for you to not take long notes because you'll get lost and you will lose them. I like short notes. If somebody says happen in elementary school, I'll put ELEM. I may not even put school because I know what that means. I'm just saying take short, brief notes that you understand because that will be important later. But if you're trying to do full on sentences in your notes and they're clipping along giving you information, they could be way down the road and you will have missed half the story. So just very short bullet point notes, and you can always go back for clarification later, or if you can't read your own handwriting, you can go back and get clarity from them. What has this problem cost you? If you're injured and you have this knee injury, it might have cost you time with your grandchildren. Maybe you feel like you can't play with them anymore. When they come over, they go outside, you have to stay inside. It's cost you like a heartbreak. Like maybe you used to play with them or play hide and seek. Maybe you can't do that anymore. That's grief. We as practitioners have to be aware of that grief. That grief is going to partly be a reason why the knee pain can't leave. Because if this person is right about their grief and their grief assessment, the pain in their knee is the proof that that grief is justified. So, and that judgment is correct. So, all of that is tied together, and we're just gradually untying it. Summarize the details for them. I like to take what they told me in a simplified way, not every single word. And I might say for this person with knee pain, well, you've shared with me that you have this knee pain and it's been going on for, let's say, 15 years, and you don't really know what caused it. And you feel in so many ways that it's really kind of stopped your lifestyle because now you can't play with your grandchildren. And you used to professionally ice skate. Now you can't do that anymore. And I try to bring it back to them because their ego is trying to push it away, like that guy that said, I don't know. I try to bring it back to them on a platter, so to speak. And then I say, given all that, and I'm so sorry you went through all that, but how does that make you feel? If you gave it one word to describe what that did in your life, what's that word? They might say angry, they might say frustrated, they might say, feel devastated. What's interesting is sometimes they will say a word that was not on your radar screen. Like they might say happy, and you might say, what? It's like you feel happy. It's like, yeah, gosh, I couldn't run after those kids. And so getting this knee injury actually was the best thing that could happen to me because now I can just rest while they play outside. Ah, we got to look at this too. Because what they're doing is they're using pain to get some kind of gain. And that's why the pain won't move because it's buying them something, you see? So even if they come up with a word that you didn't expect, that can give us so much information. So ask them to assign as an umbrella word because they might have many words to describe this thing. But I want the one word that's bigger than the others. What is that word? And they might say anger. I might feel powerless, overwhelmed, scared. I might feel just a great sense of loss, right? That I've lost my life, lost my livelihood. And it's okay if it's a phrase, that's fine too. And then I like, now that they're in that feeling, I like to ask them, when was the first time you had this feeling of loss or this feeling of overwhelm or this feeling of anger? Whatever word they gave me, now we're looking for patterns and it will pop up and they will hand it right to you. I might say, when was the first time that you felt this way? Like you were kind of, if they say trapped or stuck or lost or angry, and it felt like there was nothing you could do about it. And they might say, oh, it's funny you say that. They say this all the time. It's funny you say that because when I was in, sixth grade, maybe they'll say, I was a pitcher on our softball team and I was like the best pitcher. And, and then somebody tripped me and I fell down on my knee. Boy, I haven't thought about that in years. You'll hear this all the time. I hadn't thought about that in years and I tripped and actually it was even the same knee. I didn't even think of that. And then I couldn't play. I couldn't pitch. And it was devastating. Maybe their word was devastating. And here we go. So, what's happening here is that childhood event was probably the causal event, not causing pain, the time when they decided against themselves the first time. When I say causal event, this is a healing of the mind. Your body can't do anything without your consent. So if we find that causal event, and sometimes you don't, we'll talk about that. But if they can identify when they felt this way before, and it might be an entirely different experience. It might be when I was in third grade, little Johnny tripped me, I broke a tooth, I couldn't go to school for 6 weeks, and I was so embarrassed and I was just devastated. So it might be that they had an injury in third grade. It wasn't the same injury, but the feelings were the same. Well, what's going to happen is when we go through a trauma like this, I call it your emotional vault. It's like the door goes open, the trauma goes into your emotional vault. We close the door and it just keeps firing away until it gets addressed and neutralized. If you do not address it, you are very, very likely to recreate a complete scenario that doesn't look the same, but it's going to feel the same. And maybe more than once. I've seen this again and again and again. And if we as practitioners can get back and help people with that original event and to help them move away the emotional charge of that event, little Johnny in third grade and the chipped tooth and how embarrassing. And we have to find out now, we have to ask all the same questions about third grade. But if we can help them clear that trauma and that hurt and that embarrassment, And then we also want to clear the current one, both. You've got yourself a healing. And I wouldn't be surprised if even before they leave your session, if that knee pain is gone. The knee pain is the proof that you've been humiliated or you've been devastated or you should be angry. The pain is an effect of a judgment on yourself or someone else. And the pain or the effects or the negative experience is the proof that your judgment is justified. Does that make sense so far? All good? Okay. So we keep on going. We've asked them a series of general questions. And now we are going to ask them about that word. What's the one word that describes how that made you feel? If they give you 3 or 4, that's fine. Write those down. They're all good. But ask them if they had to pick one of those words that summarized it best. It kind of forces them to bring it to top of mind and give it a name. It's almost like the bully in the room, right? And then we can address that bully. And then I like to ask them on a 1 to 10, how big is that feeling today? And they might say, well, it's a 10 today. It's really big right now. And then I might say, how is that feeling when you think about the 3rd grade incident? So many times you will hear them say 8, 9, 10, and it was 3rd grade and they might be 58, but when they think about it, it's still very high, very normal. It just tells us that we are right over the target, right? And once we have this list, and now we've given it a rating and a name, and we found out, is there another time that they felt this way? We're just writing this down at this point. And then I like to have you memorize this little paragraph to get you going into the next stage. And you would say to them, I'd like to do an exercise with you that I think will be really helpful. I am going to start a sentence and then ask you to finish it. Don't even think about the answer. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. And then what I do is I start this sentence with, I can't let go of this blank because, now if their feeling was overwhelm, I might say, I can't let go of this feeling of overwhelm, just to make it grammatically correct. I can't let go of this feeling of overwhelm because, or if they said devastation, I can't let go of feeling devastated because, if they say angry, I can't let go of this anger because. So you can play with it a little, make it where they can relate to it. You might have to change it just a little, but they know what you're talking about. Another thing I want to mention is I don't say I have this anger because, or I have this devastation because, or I have this feeling of overwhelm because that is an obvious question. They know why they're angry. They're angry because they hurt their knee. They're angry because life is unfair. They're angry because this happened to them. We know all that. In fact, we just got all this information saying why they have the feeling that they do. We know that already. What we know less about is why they can't let go of that feeling. It's not a sentence they expect, and their ego can't quickly try to snuff me out because they're not expecting that question. If you're really angry and I say, well, why are you angry? Well, you can give me 25 reasons why you're angry in about 5 seconds, right? But if I say, finish this sentence, I can't let go of this anger because uh, it's like backing into a room and you don't know where you're going, and all of a sudden, blah, 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 here it comes. And so, I have a practice set on the next page and we'll talk about what that looks like. But say this person with knee pain, and they felt, let's say, devastated, it changed their life. I can't let go of this feeling of devastation because maybe the first thing I say is because I'll never get my life back. Do you see how big that is in their head? They may not have told us that because it's not top of mind, but it's buried deep in their heart. And what we did is we just brought that to the surface. And we need to have them share that with us. Because if we do some tapping or guided visualization or hypnotherapy, if we do these things understanding that they made a decision that day and they decided that they had lost their capacity to have a happy life because of this injury, we need to address that. We need to work with that together. Otherwise, we're avoiding the elephant in the room, right? Where it's like the biggest thing that's going on for them, and we might miss it completely. But what they did is they just handed it to us. We don't have to work so hard. We just have some good tools and some good questions, and here it comes, just pops it right up. Now, when we have them start out with, I can't let go of this devastation because, then we go into a series of questions to go deeper and deeper. And I'll show you what that looks like on the next page. And now you're going to take a bullet point list of what they come up with. You're going to ask your client, once you get those bullet points, you're going to read those back to them, what they came up with, and you're going to ask them to assign a rating to each one. Like if one of their reasons for not being able to let go of their devastation is loss of a happy life. If I say, if you gave that a rating, what number is that? 10, right? And maybe another one of their reasons is, well, I'm devastated because I wanted to go on a vacation next year and now I can't. Well, what's the number of the charge around that? Like that, your concern, your frustration with that? A 3. I hadn't planned it yet, but I was thinking about it. So that's a 3. I like them to rate each bullet point because that tells me as the practitioner where to start and where the hot spots are. It's kind of like we're firefighters and we're putting out the fire and we got the fire out, but we've got these hot spots in different places. We certainly want to cover those hot spots. So if you only have an hour with a person or an hour and a half, and you're looking down at your list and you've got a bunch of 2s and 3s and you've got a 9 plus, we definitely want to dive onto that 9 plus if we have enough time to work through it. So now we can either learn to customize our EFT tapping phrases, which I teach you in the classes, or I have a 112 card EFT library. They're all customized cards with the words already printed on the cards that help you to release the charge of these things that you come up with. And you can also use those cards to learn how to write your own or even write your own on the fly. The more you use the cards, it will become very normal language for you. And then pretty soon you can set those cards aside and you can just free will it and you'll be doing just fine. So then we apply our EFT, but now we're applying it on the roots of this problem. That's why we get such great results in a short period of time. So here's a practice set. We'll go through this quickly. And again, we're not going to do the healing aspect of this tonight, but I want you to see what we're asking, how we're gathering this information, what it looks like at a minimum. So again, this client of mine that I'm working with, let's say they come in and they have financial challenges and they're losing sleep and they don't feel good and they've got anxiety and they've got fear. So I ask them what they would like to work on and they say, oh, these financial challenges. And now I ask my client to describe the problem in full, including these following things. I start with who caused this problem, this financial problem. What's your best sense? And I like to include God in that. If they think God is part of this, like you don't feel like God is answering your prayers, we need to know if there's a judgment against God in this case. But maybe they blame themselves, which is usually about 100% of the time. They might blame a spouse or a family member for this financial difficulty. Maybe they have a 35-year-old son that lives with them and they're draining away all the finances and they think, why isn't he out there getting a job? Or, so we have to find out, who do they feel is guilty for this problem that they have? Because we need to include this in our language when we go through the healing process. So in this case, let's say they said that they judge themselves and their spouse. Maybe their spouse doesn't make enough income or stopped earning income or stopped working altogether, put all the burden on them. There's all kinds of stories. Maybe they blame an employer because they were laid off or their hours were cut. And they say, I was there 10 years and the person next to me is there 5 years and they got all my hours. And so now we've got a grievance, put a little star there, needs to be addressed. There's some guilt being assigned, right? So we need to put employer, we have to cover that. Who is involved? Well, I'm involved and my spouse is involved and My children just say, now I feel like we have to move. We can't afford where we are. So my children are involved. And maybe my mortgage company is involved because maybe I can't pay my mortgage payment and I'm trying to talk to them. And now that's a problem. So I like to know who are all the parties that are affected by this problem. Again, why do we need to know that? We're trying to identify the grievances, the judgments, the assignment of guilt, the fear, the level of anxiety, and what's it coming from? Where did this happen? Let's just say that it happened at home because it's clearly affecting my home, but it started at work. So at home and at work. When did it happen? Let's say the person believes that it happened about 14 months ago when they lost their primary source of income. In that first page, if they said it happened 14 months ago and we get all through the questions and I say, well, if you could give me one word to tell me how this feels, this loss of income and things being out of control, and they might just say, a deep level of fear. And I might say, well, just, close your eyes just for a moment. And that deep level of fear, when's the first time you ever felt that way? That's just that deep level of fear where you didn't know what was going to happen. Bring back some of the attributes, not to trigger them, just a little to get them to zero in on it. There's a balance there. You don't want to pummel them with fear words. You see what I'm saying? But you have to give them enough so they can identify what you're talking about. There's a little balance that God will let you know enough. No more negative words, right? You might send them into trauma. So they might say, well, oh yeah, I remember being afraid, when my father lost his job and then I had to change schools and okay. And then you might have to address both the 14 months ago and when the father lost his job when they were a child. You're going to have to address both at this point because they are bound together. What is your ego trying to convince you of through this problem? Now, this is a Course in Miracles, and you might have to explain to the client what you're talking about. But you could look at this scene where you don't have enough money, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling anxious, and what is this scene trying to convince you of? And you could give them examples like, I don't have enough, or I'm not enough, or I didn't do enough, or what's the story that you're building in your mind based on what you're looking at in this problem? And you write down what they say. In this case, they said, I am lacking, inadequate, broke, unsupported, I'm a failure, I will lose my home, and my future is bleak. So imagine all those thoughts running through your mind at the same time. It's really frustrating and overwhelming. And now they're thinking about all those things. So we keep moving. We don't want this to take forever because I'm not trying to get them to re experience trauma. I'm just trying to get them to zero in on it just enough so we can let it go together. What has this problem cost you in terms of relationships, money, emotions? You might have to give them examples once you learn this process. Well, they feel like they don't have any inner peace. They don't sleep at night. They don't have any sense of self esteem or confidence. Their health has been impacted. Maybe they feel like they're aging. Their home stability has been impacted, and even their credit score. These are all important. So you're writing these down again, bullet points, quick, easy, fast, credit. You don't have to write credit score. I know that sounds silly to say all that, but you can get lost very quickly because they move fast. So you're going to have to just do your own cryptic notes because every one of those words that comes out of them is important to this process. Again, you're going to take what they just told you and you're going to summarize this and hand it back to them. We want to bring it to a point where they can look at it almost like it's a basket of stuff. So I might say, based on what you've shared with me, this problem has been around, for at least 14 months and it's affected you at home and at work, and you feel like it might have an effect on your children. And then you're dealing with a mortgage company, and all of this is kind of making you feel like you're lacking or inadequate or broke or unsupported. I might even go that fast, just bringing it up and bundling it together, almost like, okay, here, now this is what we're looking at. And then what I would say is, if you could give one word to how all of this makes you feel, what do you think? I don't know. And it's like, what if you did know? That's one of our little workarounds because sometimes the ego answers and it doesn't want to answer that question. It doesn't want healing. The person wants healing, but their ego does not. So sometimes they'll say, I don't know. You could give some examples like, do you feel frustrated, sad, devastated, angry? Um, let's see, I lost my income 14 months. I don't know. I feel hopeless, right? So, okay, you feel hopeless. What number would you give that word? Oh, a 10, a 10 in hopelessness. Okay. If you close your eyes just for a moment and you have a sense of that hopeless feeling, have you ever felt that before? And, go back as far as you need to go. You could have been 4 or 5 years old. Like, have you ever felt that feeling of hopelessness before? And they say, generally 90% of the time, yes, because patterns are pretty normal. They do repeat. And so you're very likely to get yes. And then you ask them to tell you a little bit about that situation. You write that down. If they say no, this is a hot tip for you tonight. It is usually because, Jamie, do you remember what it is if they don't know where it came from?
Well, typically, and I don't want to jump ahead to something if this isn't where you're
Oh, it's
going,
okay. Go for it.
but I just usually I go with something when many years ago I took your hypnotherapy class for the first time and was exposed to this for the first time. I remember you said that in every session you had done out of like thousands of sessions, you could break the root cause down into like three things. It was either I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, or I'm not loved, lovable. And so it's like somewhere in that, the ego is just like it's one, if not a
It's
cocktail.
definitely one of those. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not loved. I'm not safe. Fear of the future.
Right.
That is definitely going to be part of that root. And
Mm-hmm.
what I was getting to, which is not a trick question, but when somebody has something pop up out of nowhere and it's just such an anomaly, like where did this come from? Most of the time, I would say every time that I'm aware of, I've never had it not be the time, it's from a past life experience. Jamie might have been in one of the classes where a guy had chronic shoulder pain
Uh-huh.
and it
Yeah.
came out of nowhere. Like, and I asked him, did you have an injury? No. Did you get in an accident? No. And then it was a hypnosis class. So we happened to take him and regress him back. He
Yeah.
was in the Civil War and his shoulder was blown off with a cannonball. And he died that way. So he
Yeah.
died in trauma. His shoulder was blown off with a cannonball. And so when he turned the age he was that time, when he died, all the shoulder pain came back. He
Mhm.
didn't know why. So anyway, that was kind of a trick question. So, but you are correct. And
Sorry,
she
I failed.
gave you great tips that at the base of every problem, if you get to the root, it's going to have something around I'm not enough, I'm not loved, I'm not worthy, I'm not safe, fear of the future. This is your ego. It's a tape loop that has trained you to believe these things about yourself. But when an incident shows up out of nowhere, no explanation, it is usually tied to a past life experience. So that's why it's good to learn hypnotherapy to be able to go back and find out what was that experience. And then we can work with it during hypnosis. So thank you so much, Jamie. Awesome. So glad you remembered that. That was a long time ago and you remember well. So now let's go to, we have our word. Let's say in this case, the person said, with all these financial challenges, they feel intense grief. That may not be the word that I expect. I might expect fear. I might expect worry. I might expect stress. When somebody has severe financial difficulties. But what this person is saying to me is this goes so deep. It really is a part of who they feel they are and what's really troubling them because the words they are using is intense grief. And that's what happens for a lot of practitioners is we decide we think we know the problem. We don't know. And so many times my client will give me words that I wasn't expecting. And I know I have good hunches and things and I can really clue into things, but we don't always know how they see it because we don't have the vantage point of what they went through. So now we've got this feeling of intense grief. And remember, we're going to ask them, what number would you give to that intense grief? They might say, oh, it's an 8 or a 10. And then when was the first time you felt that intense grief? And usually there is a time. And then I ask them for the number of that time as they think of it now. And it might be something less, it might even be more. And once we've identified the first time, now we can begin to dive deeper into what this thing is. Almost like it's a substance. You know, if it's a pain, there's legs to it. The tabletop is the problem. All the legs on that table are the aspects that are holding that problem in place. So if you have knee pain, one of the legs on the table might be an injury. Another leg on the table might be your belief that you're getting old. Another leg on that table might be you injured it once before and now you think there's no recovery. Another leg on that table might be that you saw somebody else get hurt and then they had to have knee surgery. So you feel like that's the only way out of this. So you might have 20 legs on this table. And our part as practitioner is to try to help them identify what those legs are and then to help them loosen those legs and bring that table of pain down. So now when we get ready to dive deeper, we have a general understanding of the problem. We know what this person wants to call this problem in terms of a feeling. We have a number about that feeling. We know if it's happened before where they've had a similar experience. Now we're ready to go deeper into what is holding this problem in place. This is where you can write in the column memorize this paragraph. I would like to do an exercise with you that I think is really helpful. I'm going to start a sentence and then ask you to finish it. Don't even think about the answer. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Remember, their words were intense grief. And you're going to write down what they say in bullet points. And remember, we're backing into the room instead of saying, I have intense grief, because we know those answers, right? They already told us why they have all this intense grief. What we want to know is why they can't let go of this intense grief. So this is what they say. I can't let go of this intense grief because, and that's me as the practitioner, I'm giving that to them. I can't let go of this intense grief because, and I might ask them to close their eyes and just say what comes to their mind. And they say, I have experienced this for too long, these financial difficulties. And then what I do is I take exactly what they say and I read it back to them so we can go deeper. I, the practitioner, say, and I have experienced this for too long because, and the underlines are the client, this has been a decades long struggle. Now I take their words and I hand them right back to them. And it has been a decades long struggle because, and the client says, this has happened twice before in a significant way. Do you see how much information they're giving us? Just boom, boom, boom. Reading it right back to them. And this has happened twice before in a significant way because, and you're hearing their judgments. I didn't make good decisions to save myself from this. And sometimes you can narrow that down. You don't have to be obnoxious in repeating exactly every word. You just want to make sure you capture what's being communicated. And I did not make good decisions to save myself because, or I might say, I didn't make good decisions because, either way. I always felt stuck and afraid. And I've always been stuck and afraid because things I did or tried to do did not work. And the things I did or tried to do did not work because I always struggled. And I have always struggled because I don't have adequate knowledge. And I do not have adequate knowledge because I am not a go-getter. And I am not a go-getter because I am not decisive enough. And I am not decisive enough because I procrastinate greatly. And I procrastinate greatly because learning is a challenge for me. Learning is a challenge for me because I don't have a strong will. I don't have a strong will because I am scared. I am scared because I procrastinate. I procrastinate because I don't want to make changes because it is hard. Changes are hard for me because That one I changed up a little to not make it obnoxious, right? So they said, I don't want to make changes because it is hard. I rephrased it a little just to keep their ego from anticipating everything I say and stop thinking and start anticipating. Sometimes I'll change it just a little so that they have to think about what I said. Changes are hard for me because I don't have the strength. I don't have the strength because I procrastinate more. I procrastinate when I don't have strength because, see, in that case, I put two together because they gave me two one by one, but they really went together. I procrastinate when I don't have strength because I am a sinking ship. I am a sinking ship because I am not aggressive enough. I am not aggressive enough because I must have not learned enough. I did not learn enough because I am lazy. I am lazy because I am not good enough. I am not good enough because I am not worthy. I am not worthy because I have not worked hard enough. And I call that full circle because when they start repeating reasons, we've got a nice bouquet of reasons to work with. There might be more, we can always find more. But if they start repeating something they said before, we're ready to stop and just let it be. How does all of this make you feel? It makes me feel sad, right? So we might have to address that as well. Now that I have this bullet point list, I go back and I say, let me just read these to you. I do this for a number of reasons. One is I want them to hear this line of kind of baloney about themselves because it's not the truth of them. I'm not going to add in all that, but I want them to hear what their mind has formed against themselves, right? So I'll go and I'll say, and I won't add any of my editorials or my feelings about it, just very matter of fact, just with love. I'd like to read these bullet points back to you. And when I do, can you give me a number of how triggering it is or your feeling behind it, how strong it feels to you? So I might say, I've experienced financial difficulties for too long. Notice I put that word back in there because I want them to hear not this, because it's easy for the ego to detach about this. I might say, I have experienced financial difficulties for too long or financial challenges for too long. 9. This has been a decades long struggle. 5. This has happened twice before in a significant way. 5. I did not make good decisions to save myself. 3. I always felt stuck and afraid. 7. Things I did or tried to do did not work. 7. And so on. And if you look at this list right away, you've got your roots. Here's some roots right here. And of course, the 9s and the 10s, those are the gold because those are the roots running so deep in their subconscious mind. So we want to be aware of those first if we can. You can still just work from the bottom to the top. Some people might start at the top, but if you think about going from the top of a garden down to the root, I'd rather start at the root and work up to the top because you can pull that root more quickly. Even if you pull the root of a weed out of a garden, don't you just get way down to where that root is and then you loosen it and then you pull it out. If you just pull one little petal at the time at the top, oh, what a mess. So try to either start at the bottom of your list in terms of your tapping, and we'll be talking about that next time. Start at the bottom of your list and move up. You're very likely this whole thing about sadness, not being worthy, not working hard enough, not being good enough, feeling lazy. I'm telling you that is closer to the root of these financial challenges than experiencing it for so long or a decades long struggle. That's kind of surface area pain, right? These other ones, that's key. And after we do the EFT, either with cards, if you're new at it, or you learn how to do customized statements, which is very quick once you start doing this process, then we want to go back and run them through that list again. And I might say, now when you check in with, I have experienced this for so long, what number would you give it? And they might say a 5. I'm like, cool. We know we're gaining on this. We're bringing this down. Now, if they say, this is more of a mastery technique, but say they say it's still a 9. Does anybody tell me what about that 9? What is that telling me if it hasn't moved? Anybody have any ideas? What if it's still a 9 after I did all that work? It's still a 9.
Um, you didn't get to the core?
That's my girl. Yes, I didn't get to the actual reason for that 9. So what I can do is I can do resourcing just on that one sentence. So I could say, all right, so I have this experience for so long. How does that make you feel to have something for so long? Clueless or whatever somebody might say about themselves. And you can say, have you ever felt, clueless before? And I always say, if I'm going to use a derogatory term, I will tell them in advance, look, I'm going to use your words, not mine. So if I use these words and I just kind of laugh about it, I go, these are coming from you, not me. But let's just say you're feeling clueless because you don't know how to get rid of this thing. What number would you give that feeling of being dumb and clueless? Well, a 10. And then if you close your eyes, do you ever recall feeling like clueless before? And I might laugh a little bit. I like to keep it light and keep them light because they will give me more when they're feeling at ease and peaceful and not like I'm judging them. Like, when were you clueless? No, that's not the question. When were you feeling this way before? And they might say, oh, wow, when I was 5, my teacher asked me a question and I did not know the answer and I was so embarrassed and she made me stand up in front of the class and then she berated me for not knowing the answer. She told me it before and I didn't know and I felt clueless. Guess what we have to do? We have to address that incident. And it could very well be that that incident of 5 years old is directly tied to these financial challenges. Because remember how when you have that problem as a little kid and it's in your emotional vault and it's firing away and you didn't do anything with it, you're going to keep creating scenarios where you get to feel clueless, right? If that's how you're feeling about it, it's leading us. Like when we get these 9s, those are gold mines. It means there's something under those, or they wouldn't be so charged. There's something more. So you would be shocked in an hour session how deep you can go and how you can get to the bottom of so many of these. And then you can apply the tapping and use their words in the process. This is gold. A lot of people can tap, I'm deeply and completely accept myself, or I'm willing to see myself differently. That's all fine. And it feels nice. But when you start using words like, when I was in the 3rd grade and I didn't know these answers and I felt so clueless and my teacher made me stand up and it was so horrible. And, I'm willing to ask God to take this from me and heal it for me and lift it away from my heart forever. Do you see that if we can get to their words to describe their feelings, and then we apply tapping to put tapping to those words, this is when things move. Shockingly so. I have seen migraines disappear. I've seen body pains disappear. I've seen people walk in with a cane and walk out without the cane. I used to go to work at a medical clinic for seniors mostly, and I was just helping people in the lobby while they were waiting to meet with the doctor. And the doctor was a great friend of mine. He was a retired doctor, but he was helping these people, and I think it was all free. And anyway, he was doing his work back in the office, and he knew what I did, and he loved EFT and tapping. He's like, why don't you come and just sit in the lobby and you can just work with people before they come to me? And several people didn't need to go to him after. So it was just so much fun to have somebody walk in with a cane and walk out without one. It is mind blowing. And I see the nods because those of you that have experienced this before, it's phenomenal. And it doesn't mean that we are these amazing healers. It just means we have good, solid tools. We have amazing guidance that's coming at us all the time because we are asking. In my classes, I'm always guiding you to pray first, ask God for help, especially when you're stuck, ask God for help. And it's so surprising. Something is going to happen to get that session moving forward if you ever feel stuck. So at the end of the day, we have this process called resourcing is just one of several ways to get to the root cause of a problem.
And then we apply things like EFT or guided visualization. Or if we don't know the cause of a problem, even after doing all this work, like I said before, does anybody remember, if we don't know the cause in this lifetime, what does it mean? It's probably back a ways, right? Past life. So then we need hypnotherapy and hypnotherapy is great. If you've never had that before, it's very relaxing. Some people have reported that they were peaceful for the first time in their whole life during hypnotherapy. What we do in hypnotherapy, just real quickly, is I think it gets a really bad rap because, people put others on stage and they quack like ducks and they do all kinds of goofy things with them. And that is certainly not what we do with it. What we do with hypnosis is we quiet down your conscious mind. That's that thinking, analytical, always in the way, the thoughts in the middle of the night saying you're not enough. That's the conscious mind, the ego mind. And then you have your superconscious mind, which is your God intelligence. And then you have your subconscious mind. I point here just because it's deeper in your mind. Those are your deeply held beliefs about yourself. Your subconscious mind records everything. It's like a big recorder, and it records every trauma, every pain, every time you felt helpless or hopeless or angry or disappointed, and of course, all the good times too. But if that recorder gets overwhelmed and full, then your subconscious mind is just filled to the brim with all these hurts. And then your conscious mind, I call it your guard dog at the fence. So your conscious mind is trying to protect that and keep the healing from happening. So your conscious mind is actually trying to block your healing and release. So, what we do in hypnotherapy is we quiet your mind, we bring your brain waves down to a slower level, and we help your conscious mind to go quiet. That guard dog at the fence is kind of like throwing him a piece of steak and letting him go off to the side and gnaw on that for a while. Just get him out of the way. And then we help your super conscious God mind connect with your subconscious mind. And then we, as the practitioners, we're just tour guides, basically. We are taking the role of the conscious mind, the one to analyze. So if I take you back, let's say Rhonda here, she has this terrible grief and she doesn't know where it comes from. Maybe she just feels grief all the time, every day, and doesn't know why. So if I put her into hypnosis and now she's very relaxed, her guard dog is off doing whatever he's doing. And I could say, Rhonda, at this time, I'd like you to go back in time to the very first time that you ever experienced grief. And we're just going to observe it. We're not going to have you feel it or re experience it. That's not necessary. But let's go back as if we could go there together and just observe, when was the first time you ever experienced that grief? And then Rhonda, in her very slow voice, because she's in a nice, deeply relaxed state, she might say, that, oh, oh, wow. And I might say, what are you experiencing? And now she's just in an experience. And I am analyzing it. She's not, because her conscious mind is kind of off to the side. She's just telling me what's going on. So she might say, well, I'm on a wagon train. Okay, tell me more. Well, oh my goodness. And I'm like, what? Well, my husband, he just keeled over, and I don't know how to drive the wagon, and he means everything to me. And all right, tell me more about who's around you, what's happening. So now she's telling me about this experience, which is usually a trauma. You have to know this going into this work. You are going to work with people in trauma. That's the stuff that's not healed. It's not scary. It's very deep, loving work. All you're doing is helping them release the pain that they didn't get to release before they left that time. We bring in that God intelligence. We bring in angels if we need to. We might bring in a wise, loving grandmother that's important to them. We try to match them with what they feel is helpful the most. So we will know all that from the interview at the beginning. So we bring in tools for them to be able to address the situation they're in. And then we guide them through a healing process so that they can release the grief of that moment. So it could very well be, if Rhonda's experiencing grief today and doesn't know why,
that she might have hit the age she was back then when her husband killed over off that wagon. It's just the most wild thing, but it matters. And then when she releases the grief from that time and place, she's very likely to come back to a waking state and she has no grief. And that's a really good day, right? It's a really good day. These techniques are easy. There is a healer within all of us. He will never let you down, never leave you stuck, as long as you're asking. Right? Sometimes, if we're trying to do it all ourselves, then we aren't asking. But you'll see with resourcing, just to recap, we start out finding out what the problem is. And then we go through a series of very general questions, just getting a little sense of what's going on. And then we help the client to find a word to describe that general sense of things. We give it a number. We have them close their eyes, take them back to a time where they might have had that experience before. If they can't think of one ever, we're already thinking, wonder if it could be a past life. Or it could be that this is the first time, maybe they were trampled by a horse last week at the racetrack and, that's enough, right? Could be that it's a first time event and that's okay. That happens too. Generally, you'll find there's a pattern here, and that pattern is trying to come up, and the ego is trying to use it against them, and the Holy Spirit's trying to help them heal this. And they've come to you as the healer because you understand that connection. And then you can use these very simple tools to help them release and let go. And you'll find even using the EFT cards, tremendous healing can happen. You don't have to have perfect words and customized phrases. You can use the cards. Like if this person feels grief, I have a card for grief. If somebody feels angry, I have a card for anger. And you can just follow along the card and maybe dub in a couple of your own words off of their list. If they feel like a sinking ship, and you say, even though I feel so angry and sometimes I feel like a sinking ship, you just got them to identify one of their own judgments against themselves. And then it's amazing what can happen there. And then we go into that deeper level. We've got a nice surface level of what's going on, what we call it. Did they have that feeling before? Now we're ready to go after the root. I have this exercise I'd like to do with you, and you're going to memorize that paragraph. And then we back into that room and we say, I can't let go of this blank because, and then we're going to walk them through the because sequence in the mastery class. There's a few different times where you might need to twist that or tweak it here and there. And then, of course, you practice with other people. Even if it's online, you're going to practice with other people. And so those are good things to learn. Because sometimes if somebody says, I feel, I have always felt inadequate, and I might add, instead of saying, and I always feel inadequate, because I might tweak that a little as the practitioner just to see if something else is there and say, and I allow myself to feel inadequate because, or I have a need to feel inadequate because, I might put in a few other words that lead them in a little different direction just to gather a few more of their descriptors so that we can cover all of them, because when you do, the problem goes away. And then we get those words, we assign numbers to all those so we know what those hot spots are. We can generally, I like to see you start at the bottom of your list. It's closer to the root. So when we did that full list, I've had people go on for 5 pages of the because some people it's 6 bullet points and boom, we're back to a full circle. Other people, they have a lot of descriptors for why they feel the way they do. And I just gather all of them up and I include every one of those in my healing sequence. So their ego has been addressed on every single level of judgment. So if they have 1,000 words, that's okay. We're going to read 1,000 words back to them, and they are going to abandon those words with me one by one by one. They're like weapons being used against them. And then we get all this great information. We've got it in their words attached to what they feel.
And then we apply EFT tapping using those words, or at a beginning level, using the EFT cards. And then for things that we don't know or don't understand, we use hypnotherapy and we go back and find out what was that about. It's the same process, really, but you start to become very comfortable being with people in trauma. They do cry, it's okay. When you get to see the smile at the other end of that, the tears are worth it. Sometimes you'll cry with them. I did for the first many years. I think now I don't cry as much with them because it's not getting as triggered within me. Now I kind of cry out of joy when I see them so light and happy. And sometimes people can emerge from tapping or hypnosis and they literally look 10 years younger. The lines have left their forehead and their face is relaxed. And I might even show them, look in this mirror, and they might go, whoa, because it's like they just lost a decade off of their face. Does anybody have questions about this process?
I had a question, Robin.
Sure.
How are you?
Hi, Sophia.
How you doing? I know it's been
My
a long
gosh,
time.
it's you, Sophia. It's my
Yes,
Sophia.
it is your Sophia. Yes. Um,
Good to see you.
you as well. My question is, how would one practice this on oneself?
Sure, it's a very similar process. I'll give you an example. I went up to a seminar. This is many years ago. It was actually my own hypnotherapy practice seminar where I became a hypnotherapist. And it wasn't where I became an instructor, it was when I first became a hypnotherapist. And right before I left, I had paid off a credit card so that I could use it when I was in the other end of the state. And when I got there, my credit card wouldn't work. And I knew that I had paid it. I knew there was enough time. And so I'm sitting in my car and I realized that I was just more frustrated about this than I should have been. It's one thing to be frustrated, but I was kind of borderline angry, just angry. And I could feel this flood of anger. And I thought, I wonder why I feel that way. And I decided to resource myself, basically. So I decided to think about this and I was thinking, okay, I tried to call the credit card company and they treated me like they had never talked to me before. I'd had an account for like 20 years and they just treated me like I was nobody and nothing and that I must have made a mistake and it was my problem. And they were really rude. And that's when I hung up the phone and I was just angry. I was frustrated about the card, but it was more than that and I could feel it. So I thought, okay, I need to resource this. Like, why am I so angry about this? I wanted to get a hold of it. I'm sitting there at night in my car and I thought, all right, how does this make me feel? And I thought, well, it kind of makes me feel like I'm a loyal customer that's been dismissed. I've been a customer all these years and I made this payment. I did all the right things and I'm just being written off and they won't even talk to me about it. And I just sat there and I thought, okay, well, that's kind of what I'm feeling. And then I decided to just do a little tapping on that. So I started, even though I have this problem with my credit card, I'm feeling, because I know that if I call the credit card company when I'm supercharged like that, it's not going to go well. So I'm trying to bring down this charge because I'd already called them and it didn't work. So I'm tapping out just these feelings. And I got into about the second tapping point, and this memory flooded back on me. And the memory was getting married the first time and feeling like I was the loyal wife and that I had checked all the boxes. And then ultimately, when things didn't work, which meant much of it was my own fault too, but when things didn't work, it felt like the marriage just meant nothing after so many years. And it was like I was this kind of loyal customer that was written off. And that was in my vault. Right or wrong, good or bad, it's nothing about the other person. I'm just saying I had put that in my vault. So when my credit card company, my repeating pattern comes along, because ego uses what works, it comes along and it creates a scenario where I get to feel that way again. Now I call it a compound fracture. It's like I have a broken arm and somebody just slugged me in the arm, right? So I tapped on that original event. Tears just poured out of me. And then I went back and I did the customized tapping based on this experience with a credit card company, and it was much lighter, like it was credit card companies, whatever, but an annoyance. Now it was an annoyance instead of raging anger, right? And all of it came down. And I'm just sitting there quietly and just thanking God for just taking all of this away. And I heard very strongly, call them back. And even in my mind, I thought, why call them back? They were very clear that this is not their problem and you got to figure it out. And he's like, call them back. I call them back. I get the most wonderful person on the line. Hello, Miss Duncan. We're so happy to talk to you. I see here that you've been a loyal customer for over 20 years, and we're so happy to help you. What can we do for you? And I said, well, I made this payment. I cleared my card. I'm actually traveling out of my city, and I kind of need this card. That's what I was planning to pay for my hotel with. She said, oh, I completely understand. And oh, I see your payment right here. Let me just get this cleared for you. For some reason, it must have gotten hung up, but let's get it cleared. She goes, oh, it's all done. You are completely clear and good to go. Your card is paid off. And is there anything else I can help you with? And she just couldn't have been more kind and wonderful. You have to know that people play the roles that mirror our belief system. It was amazing. So when you're doing it with yourself, again, just what's the problem? Get a few details about that problem to bring that, bundle it back up in your mind. Like, when did it happen? How long has it been there? How does it make you feel? What number would you assign that feeling? If you gave it a word, what number is that word? And then, have I ever had that feeling before? See, from that experience is where I came up with this process of assess now and now ask yourself about before. And I would say 99% of the time, the person is going to say, yes, I have had this feeling before. And they will lay out an experience like it happened yesterday, that it's still ripe. So you will just do that same thing with yourself. And then once you have a nice general list, you're going to get that word and you're going to start with yourself and say, I can't let go of this word um, because I don't know how, and I don't know how because I'm not skilled, and I'm not skilled because I I've never done this before, and I need to do this myself because I never have help, and I never have help because I'm unsupported, and I'm unsupported because nobody will help me with anything, and then you're getting deeper and closer to the root. And you might just find that this person feels completely abandoned by God or by their spouse or by their daughter, or and you don't get to that until you just keep going because down to the deepest root. But that's a quick way to just do it with yourself. It's the same process. It's just you're asking yourself those questions and then just do the because with yourself. Does that make sense, Sophia?
Yes, absolutely. It does. Thank you.
Thank you. I just love Sophia. I've known her for so many years. And when I see her, I think of, and I'm not sharing any details, of course, but I just think about all you've been through, my friend, and how wonderful you look. And I know your daughter must be so precious. And just this rush of love comes over
Oh,
me. I haven't
thank
talked to you in so
you.
many years.
Yeah, well, it's been 4 years since Robert passed. This
Yeah.
November was 4 years, so it's been about that amount of time. And Isabel's going to be 20 this month, so
She was like a young person I mean,
yeah,
young when we
yeah.
were talking, but I just love her. And it's so great. Like, when you do this work with people, they're in your heart forever. You walk a journey that can't be unwalked. So
Thank you.
wonderful. Does that answer your question? Okay.
It does, yeah,
Good,
absolutely.
good.
So basically, just using the same script, but just using it on oneself.
It's on oneself. Yeah. Or even if you need to write it on a tablet, that might work. You could be the questioner and the answerer if you need a
Okay.
two-party system.
Okay.
Or you can have somebody else ask you those questions if it
Right. And
doesn't
the other
feel
thing
too
I thought
personal.
about is possibly just journaling on it.
Right.
Maybe.
And it is nice to close your eyes and have somebody ask you these questions,
Mm,
if they learn how to do that, because it's surprising what comes up when you're not scripting it yourself
yeah,
and already guarding that information.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, hi Robin. Can we practice with each other? So
You sure can. You can practice with anyone. I just ask you to not charge for this
Yeah,
service and not use it professionally until you're
right.
certified and checked out. Because of course you can practice with people, especially I would say practice just getting used to the process, and then when you learn a little bit about the EFT, you can use EFT cards and you can neutralize that pain. And it's amazing. I just even with the cards, I think a lot of the students have told me over time that just the cards, because it becomes such a natural part of your own language. This is one of 5 processes of identifying the root cause of a problem. And I think it's one of the most fun, too, that we can just really quickly get to the root of a problem. But there are 4 other methods that are taught in the EFT with the Source Technique program. If you like the whole process of resourcing and then using EFT as your basic skill to get the thing out of the way, my typical EFT with the Source Technique program is beginning to mastery. I call it levels 1, 2, and 3. It's beginning, advanced, and mastery. Because you know what? If you're not confident using these tools, guess what? You won't use them. And then all of my time will be moot. So I want you to use these tools. People need your help. Even people that are not great at it can have great success. People that are brand new. I have seen some of the most magnificent healings on the first day of practice between 2 students. It's just been remarkable. Sometimes they might be practicing together and they're just racing through their notes, like, where's that? Where's that? Where's that? And it's all messy and all that. And then when they get done, the client emerges, they're smiling 10 years off their face. And it's like, oh, she was so great. And, it doesn't mean we have to be perfect, but this process works. And so if we just are patient with that process and we allow it to show itself, and we're asking for divine help, and we're learning to listen and not judge ourselves so much, we can be present while people release and let go of years and years of pain and suffering. I really am going to give you tools that help and work. This is not just to get you to buy stuff. This is only if you would like to continue on with your training. And I'm going to try to make that as affordable as I possibly can. It's been so great to be with you guys tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Right on time today.
Well, you guys are the best. Great to see everybody, and we'll be back with more techniques.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
You're
you. Thank you,
welcome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Love
So
you guys.
Bye.
Bye. And there we go. I had to laugh as I just listened to my own lecture, because I have done this so many times with clients and just gone down to the root of the problem. And really, at that root, we usually find I am not worthy. I am not safe. I am not enough. I am not loved. Or they have a terrible fear about the future. So they're always concerned either with the past or they are concerned with fear of the future. And we all have that. And once we identify it and then we start using the language that the client gave us in the EFT process, you're going to see all of those triggers and numbers come down, and your client is going to look younger. The years come off their face and they relax. They start to sleep at night. We are emotional vaults walking, and we're so powerful. I think one of the things that really shocks me is how powerful we are and how much we are capable of carrying. We can carry so much. I can't even tell you how many buckets of tears I have cried while tapping, while resourcing. It's kind of like one of those magicians where they pull the Kleenex out of the box and it just keeps coming and coming. And you're like, where is this coming from? Whether it's an experience when you were 4 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old, we hold this stuff and we can hold a lot. And then we get sick because our body cannot manage this emotional pain that we are so capable of quietly holding so that nobody sees what's going on behind the scenes. But it's just so important to get to the root cause. So today was really about
having you look at that process of, you know, we identify it, we kind of understand the story around it, ask enough questions so you get a good sense of it. Where do you stop? It's hard to say. If you were drawing a sunset, you would stop when you thought you captured it, you know? So we kind of stop when we get what happened in that situation. You know, if my client said to me, "Well, my brother and I got in an accident." Well, that doesn't tell me very much. You know, I don't know what happened there. You know, was it a car accident? Were they on a hike? You know, what happened there? So I would need to know more. I want to know what happened in that accident. Who was involved? How did it make you feel? How long ago did it happen? You know, almost like if I had to turn around and tell that story to someone else, I have enough information that I could do that. We don't want to make it obnoxiously so, but where we just have a good grip, we understand what happened, we understand how it felt for them, how it impacted their life, and also what it cost them. That is one of my favorite questions because something so simple could happen. The person could be 4 years old and they invite their 4 year old friend to come over and they're playing with dolls, right? And while they're sitting there playing with dolls, let's say that their little 4 year old friend takes all the dolls, including their doll, and takes it home and never talks to them again. So now their doll has been stolen, their friend has betrayed them. They don't feel like they can trust anyone. So they form all of these decisions as a 4 year old child about what this means, and they might be still operating from those same decisions today at 64 years old. So they won't share anything. They don't trust anyone. They don't invite anyone into their home. It's amazing how much we use those old traumatic experiences to define how we're acting today and what life means for us. But when we do that little bit of EFT prayer tapping, and we acknowledge when I was 4 years old and this little kid came over and we were having so much fun, and then they took my doll, you know, it's just extraordinary. And when that pain comes down as an adult, they are able to reassess. They see that that was one incident, not every incident. Maybe they're willing to forgive that 4 year old because they were four. You know, they didn't really do the right thing. So as an adult, we can rationalize. But when that fence of pain and emotional trauma is in front of us, we can't see through the fence. So today is about that, just understanding we're going after the root. It's usually combined with another root because patterns are prevalent. You know, if you're feeling scared or anxious today about something, and if you were to ask yourself, when have I felt this way before? You might have 10 different times you felt this way before. And I love to ask, what is the first time you felt this way? Because that's usually closer to the root. It might even be in another lifetime, but the first time you can remember is usually very important. And if we can do the tapping around that first time, watch this thing unravel right in front of your eyes. So, does anybody have any questions? Today was much more about theory, process, just kind of watching how it works. And then we'll break it down to structure. And as you take your bullet point notes, it's not hard to do. You're just recording what the person is telling you based on some good questions. And then after you're all done with those bullet points, I have my client sit back, close their eyes, relax, and I say, okay, give me some numbers. You know, this one about I am not worthy. What number is that? How does that feel? How much agreement is there? Like, oh, that's correct. You know, this is right. A 9. What about I have not worked hard enough in my life? You know, whatever. It might be a 8. Or this whole situation makes me feel so sad. It's a 9. Well, then go after your nines and your tens first as the practitioners, and you're going to see this whole tower of pain tumble down. Don't waste your time with the ones and twos. Those will go out with the bathwater, right? So when you're going after the bigger numbers first, and then say you go after 4 or 5 big ones, and even if you have your client again close their eyes, read those statements to them, watch, most of those numbers have come down automatically when we didn't even cover it because the bigger numbers take down the smaller numbers. Sometimes we're triggered about something because of something much bigger, so it's more aware to us, you know? So, any questions? What do you guys think?
So
Mhm.
I have a question. So after you say that phrase that I am holding this problem and I cannot get rid of it because, and then we have all the because, then we go back and then kind of like read the becauses
Read the
and then
bullet points, the becauses, yes.
becauses and then we assign a number to each of them.
We ask the client to assign the
The
number.
client, yes,
Just
of
of
course.
their, I kind of describe it as their level of trigger, how much they agree. You know, like if you say, I am not a smart person. Well, I might have a little of that, but because of society and all that, but I don't really agree with that. I might be like a 1 or a 2. Like I feel like I can, with God's help, get through anything, you know. So I'm not an absolute zero as a human, but say I grew up and my parents told me, you're not smart, you're stupid, you don't know how to do anything. I don't know why you even think you can succeed. Well, for somebody like that, if you hear, I am not smart, it might be a 10 plus, so it just depends how it strikes you at the time. So we want to get our clients to assess the numbers. But I love the backing into the room. So say your client has this problem, they describe it to you to your satisfaction so you know what's going on. And then we say, if you gave one word to describe this problem. Okay, simple, silly problem. This weekend, we would really like to go see our granddaughter for her 5th birthday. This is all real. This weekend. She's in Tucson. We would probably drive. We're not sure if we can go yet because our dogs are in heat. Our dogs are in heat, and we would never want to leave them with something while they're in heat because they're very challenging. They're very high maintenance. We have to keep them separated. They're very anxious. One is always trying to get to the other one. Like the last thing I would want to do is leave this problem with a dear friend of mine. So I don't really know what's happening this weekend. And I'm not really alarmed by that because I'm used to not knowing. But let's say I'm back in my old day, this might have stressed me out because I don't know if I'm going or not. I don't know if I can go. And there's a lot of people involved waiting to find out if we are. And I know this is a very simple, silly problem. But I might ask, how does that make me feel? That makes me feel anxious. It still does because I'm like, I don't know what we're doing, It may not be a lot, but there's a little bit of anxiety because I don't know. And it's not even about me. I could care less. I would love to go. If I can't, I don't. It's God's plan. I accept. My anxiety comes in according to my ego because I'm more concerned about how it affects other people, like our granddaughter not having us there, or her family not having us there, or promising someone to watch the dogs that now we have to say, no, that's all different. It's always about the other people with me. For me, I don't care. Like, I'll go wherever God puts me. But do you see, there's that little bit of anxiety. So if I had to ask myself, what number is that? For another person, it might be a 10 that they don't know if they're going or not going. For me, it's like a 2. And then I think, okay, I can't let go of this anxiety because, and if Pat was asking me this, I would probably say, because it involves other people. And you would say, and it's a problem because it involves other people, because you might put that together just so it sounds like a whole question, instead of it involves other people, because, well, you obviously know it involves other people. So this is a problem for you because it involves other people, because I don't want to let them down. I don't want to have them wonder if we're coming because they're preparing, they're trying to figure it out, they're planning a party, whatever they're doing. So you see, when you say, I can't let go of this anxiety because boom, here comes the real concern. It has really nothing to do with the 5-year-old birthday party. It doesn't have to do with my desire to go or not. It has to do with how I affect other people, whether I can decide or not to go. So you see that when we get to the root, a lot of times it's not anything what you thought it was. And so
Mhm.
these questions lead you to that very core part of the problem. Then when we tap that anxiety, even though I have this anxiety because I'm not sure what we're doing, I'm not sure if we're going or not, and this troubles me because it involves other people and I don't want to inconvenience them. Now, as Robin the practitioner, I might come back in and start putting in some truth and say, I am willing to understand that if I cannot go, it is right for everyone. We are one. What is right for me is right for everyone. I don't need to be anxious. And then, middle of the chest, I am willing to follow God's plan. Whether I go, whether I don't, it will bless everyone. You see, that was my concern. So that starts to bring that number down. Say now it's a 2, and you go back to your client. Now that you think of it, this feeling of anxiety, I like to say it was, what did I say it was? I don't know. So let's just say it was a 4. What is it now? I don't say, did it go down? Because I'm leading them. So we're
Mhm.
going to learn a lot about this, but I don't lead them. It might even have gone up because now we're actually talking about it. Sometimes when you're talking about a particular problem, it goes up before it goes down. Just because now you're tuned into it and now it's like, well, it was a 4, now it's a 5. Now we're talking. That's okay. It just means now we're really thinking about it. We're bringing up that fear and anxiety. Now we can really take it down. So don't be worried if their number goes up and then down. Very normal.
Mhm.
But let's say, oh, I still have a 2. What's your 2? I just say it that way. What's your 2? And I can't let go of this 2 because, let's see. I can't let go of this 2 in anxiety because I can't plan out the rest of my life. You see how that's an entirely different concern I just laid out for you? Like the other one had to do with other people. That was a table leg. This one has to do with I'm in limbo. I don't know if I'm supposed to plan being home this weekend, gone this weekend. Again, this is a silly issue. And look how complicated it is, right? So
Mhm.
now
Mhm.
my 2 might be something about the future, probably as you get towards the bottom, because the ego hops the fence. It's losing me on feeling bad in the past about other people. And it's trying to still hold me in the anxiety. And it says, well, Robin, but you don't know what you'll be doing. Now you don't know what you'll do with your weekend, right? And you should do this and you should do that, but now you can't plan this. There's a young man I'd like to help this weekend. He's a 17-year-old and he's had seizures. And I really wanted to meet with him this weekend because it's very present for him. And I think I have a sense of what's going on for him. But I can't meet with him because I'm supposed to go to Tucson for my granddaughter's birthday party. So I can't set that up. So they're in limbo. I'm in limbo. My granddaughter's in limbo. So you see how ego uses all these silly events and details. But now my 2, let's say in this example that I'm kind of making up, but based on a real situation, that final piece is I don't know what I'll be doing. So that makes me anxious. So then if I tap that out, even though I still have this 2, because I don't know what I'll be doing this weekend and I can't plan to use my weekend the way I'd like to, I am willing to choose peace anyway. I might add in as Robin practitioner, if God wants me to work with this young man, it shall be done. If there's another plan for him, there will be another plan. I accept the plan exactly as it is. You see, and even in that situation, my 2 is likely to go right into a 0. I
Mhm.
just had to acknowledge it and understand it. And then that anxiety, which might even create a headache or a back pain or a neck pain, because your body's trying to process this anxiety and it's being held because we're not addressing it, we're not dealing with it. And when we talk about it and tap, out it goes. Make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
Anybody else? That was a great question.
Thank you.
Great. So we get a sense of the problem, enough to our satisfaction, and then we ask our client, can you give me a word, an umbrella word? There's many words to describe this problem, but what word would you describe it with that really includes all the others? Let's say a young man gets injured at a soccer tournament and now he's benched and he is, let's say his leg hurts. It's so bad. It's a 20. The pain is so bad. But if I ask him, now that I give it back to him, remember, I bundle up what they told me just in a simple way. I say, what you've shared with me is you got injured in this soccer tournament. Plus, they feel heard when I'm doing this. So they feel validated, they feel heard. The ego's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You heard everything I said. So I try to not cover everything, but just some of the finer points. You were in this soccer game. It sounds like this other kid kind of slide tackled you and he did it on purpose. He tried to injure you. And now you got this 20 and a leg pain. How does this whole situation make you feel if you gave it one word? As a practitioner, I couldn't anticipate what that word is because I might think he's just in terrible pain, but he might say, I am really angry. I'm like, angry? I thought you were in pain, Well, and I
Mhm.
might say, and I'm angry because that kid did this on purpose. So now we've got a grievance. We've got a targeted grievance towards this other player. But see, I as a practitioner might think his biggest problem is his 20 points in pain. No, it's not. He's mad at that kid, right? So we're going to have to address that in our tapping. We're going to have to bring in some calming, comforting words. And so you can go to a tapping card, maybe it's on grievances or being upset with another person, things like this. And you're going to learn how to use those tapping cards to acknowledge the problem and then bring in some calming, comforting, powerful spiritual principles to calm it down.
So in this case, since the grievance is very big, you don't go to the and I feel grievance against this other guy because I
Sure,
mean
if
you
you'd
have
like
enough.
more information, you might already know, like he might have told you, I'm really mad at this kid because he did that on purpose and I got hurt. That pretty much sums it up.
Mhm.
What maybe you don't know is he did it in the last game too. So now we've got to cover both because
Okay.
it's really two different incidents. So that's why I rebundle it and I say, does this kind of summarize how you feel? I rebundle it and I hand it back to them just from my notes. I kind of go, so this is what I understand. This is what's upsetting to you. And then I say, then give me a word. But in the process, he might say, and this isn't the first time you did that.
Okay.
And now I've got to add that to my list because that's another table leg. If we try to shake this down and he still has a grievance about the last game or the last 5 games, we just need to include that. Like, even though this kid did this to me and he did it on purpose, let the ego talk and be validated, be heard. But then if we say, and this is not the first time, he has done this to me 5 times, now the person is being heard and validated and they're letting all of that angst and that pain come up to be acknowledged, and then we release it. But when it's stuck in the vault, then they're stuck in the pain. And
Mhm.
that kid might have 5 table legs. One might be his anger at the other kid. One might be that he's benched and he doesn't like being benched and he wants to play. And so he's mad about that, mad at his coach. Maybe he feels he can play and he's not allowed to. Maybe he's upset about the pain because he's literally in pain. Maybe he's upset because he feels like if he's benched, he shouldn't have to go at all. So he's resentful about that because he's not getting his homework done and he can't play. And why should he have to sit there anyway and miss out working on his homework because his grades are falling? You start to hear all these grievances in their mind. Just write them down, tap them out one by one, and watch the pain come down. I did this actually with a soccer player that he got slide tackled on purpose. The other team played dirty and they were all trying to hurt the kids and they were bigger. So he was really offended by it. So he had groin pain. He had pulled a groin muscle. He was benched and I was trying to help him with the groin pain. But what I found out is he was super mad at the other player, not only because they did it, but because they did it on purpose. That's like two.
Mm-hmm.
Having it done to you is one thing that you have to get over. Having it done on purpose, that's quite another. And then he was upset because he couldn't work out. And then he was upset when I kept going back in, like, what else? What else? What else? Like the Kleenex coming out of the box. And then he said, well, my coach told me I can't work out. He goes, but I did. And I re-injured it.
Oh my
Now we
God.
got to
Yeah.
forgive yourself, right? You got that problem going on. So he's like, there's just one after the other. So he had all these reasons why he was upset about this. And when we were done, he had no groin pain. It was gone. There was no more reason for it. He had forgiven himself for working out prematurely. He forgave the other player for being dirty and nasty in how he played, right? And we were willing to forgive him because I said to this young man, I said, you know, if you're willing to forgive him, I go, do you believe in God? It's okay if you don't. Yeah, I do. I do. I said, if we'll give this to God and let your player work it out with God, and if you're willing to do that, do you know that the groin pain can come down? Wouldn't you like it to come down? Yes. Would you be willing to forgive this kid, turn him over to God, if this pain could go away? Yes. See, he's making a decision. Keep the pain, be mad and hurt, or forgive this kid, give the kid over to God, let God deal with it. I get to come away with no pain or less pain. Okay, I'll forgive him. So I give people alternatives based on experience, and they usually don't want to keep the grievance because the grievance is hurting them. And so when they're willing to forgive that kid and turn it over, watch that pain come down. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also when the Holy Spirit intervenes and can heal the whole situation. But grievances block the light, and miracles are seen in light. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Understand the story. Give that the feeling about that story a name. Go after the name. I can't let go of this name, whatever it is, because, and they'll give you more reasons about this story that really trouble them. How
Mm-hmm.
has this cost you? What has it done in your life? Why is this upsetting for you? And then we do our because we do all that. And I teach you how to do that because there's a couple of times when, if your client says, well, I'm in pain because they hit me with their car, right? So the minute they pass the baton out to someone else, that someone else is not in my room. I've got to bring the baton back to my client. So even though they said, I'm in pain because that person hit me with their car, it's like the blame's over there. But I'm less concerned about that person and more concerned about how that person and their car affected my client. So in that case, I'm going to switch it up and I'm going to say, and they're hitting me with their car was really upsetting to me because that's where I bring the baton back and hand it back to my client. And then they
Mm-hmm.
might say, because they saw me. You'll get other reasons. The reasons are the table legs. They saw me and they kept going. And I like to, and in that case, as a practitioner, I kind of want to know more about that. They saw you, they kept going. I might say just stop and ask a question, no more because you can always stop and just ask a question. I might say, so let me get this right. They saw you, let's say you're in a crosswalk or something, they kept going. What's your sense of it? Why? Why did they do that? Because that's another table leg. And now they might say they were on their cell phone. Well, now I've got another grievance about this cell phone. So don't think those don't matter too, because everything that comes out of their mouth about why they're upset about this matters. So I might have to say, I was in that crosswalk and minding my own business. And I even walked when the light turned green and I was where I was supposed to be. And this person came up in their car and I saw them and they saw me and they kept on coming and they hit me. So first we have to address with that, right? because they're so upset about they hit me. And then the next layer is, and they were on their cell phone. Now that we've dealt with the accident itself, and they were on their cell phone, and I couldn't believe it. And that was so upsetting. And, now, God, will you please help me with this? I was so mad at them. And then watch the pain come down. The pain is the effect of all of it wrapped together. So as practitioners, we're just kind of pulling it apart. That God will help, the client will help. It's really quite easy when you learn the process. They're the ones that give you all the jewels to help them move through the problem. And then we apply EFT like any other day, and we just address the words they have given us. We start with the nines and tens, go down to the lower numbers, and watch your client walk away with a smile on their face. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, super
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah. But anybody else? You guys good? So that's intro to resourcing. We're going to break it down a little more structured. So you go, okay, I know what I'm doing, but I wanted you to kind of free flow through it and just go, okay, what are we doing? Trying to get a picture. How does that picture feel for the client? What word would they use to describe it? I can't let go of that word, whatever that is, because, and then they're going to give you more reasons. Now we're going to number those reasons, all the reasons, and then we're going to go do some tapping. And if we end up on a 9 or a 10, we can hop off of those like a launch pad. Maybe in this case, what was it? We have a 9 on, I have experienced this for too long. That says a lot. They're telling me a lot right there. So I might just stick on that one for a minute and say, tell me more about that. This whole, I've experienced this for too long. And they might say, well, I've had financial challenges, at least 3 times in my life. And the first 2 times I lost everything. Look what they just told me. There is some big grievances there, feelings of loss. We're probably going to have to cover those first 2 incidents, especially if they lost everything. It's a cruel world when that happens. And so it doesn't mean it's going to take a whole session. We can cover those first 2 rounds when they lost everything in 5 or 10 minutes. But that's the table legs that are holding this grief. That's why it's grief in this case, because it's happened too many times. And now they just feel like they are an inadequate, unworthy person because it just keeps showing up and they can't stop it. So now it's not just fear and anxiety, it's grief. Like they're fighting a monster in their life and they're losing. But we got to find out, why do they feel that deep level of grief? And so as you just sit back and say, about the 9 or the 10, can you tell me more about that? Or, that number's pretty high. It's that high because we could go back into because, like, this number is really high because, and then here comes the whole other story. And we don't want too much. Like when you get enough that you can manage it, stop and deal with it with tapping and release. Like you don't want 25 pages of reasons, you'll get lost yourself. But when you get a hold of something, and you'll know just even the way your client is talking, they're in it, you're in it, stop and deal with it. And then move on, get more details. It starts to bundle up again. Go ahead and do the release, go back, and then start over to the new list. So we don't want to have a zillion things to address because your client will forget all about page number 1, right? So try to really understand something well, get them to feel it a little bit, not relive it. And I tell them that I know this is a hard topic. I know it's sensitive to you. I don't want you to relive it, but we have to get a hold of it enough so we can let it go together. Are you okay with that? And they're like, sure, absolutely. They don't want to hold it. All right, you all, you're the best. I know that was a long one today. Next time it won't be so long. I say that every time, right?
That's a lot of information, but
I know.
very
You
valuable.
have replays, you have notes, and each time you hear it, it'll just make so much more sense. I always say it won't be as long next time, so you'll come back, right? That was a joke.
I'll come back.
But I think next time is shorter. I do want to go a little deeper into resourcing, but I think this next time we're going to cover the conversation, which is when you're just sitting down first time with a client and I give you all the questions that you can pick from. You don't have to ask all of them, but we're going to go through the conversation just where you learn to be comfortable sitting and talking with a brand new client, getting a whole bunch of information. Then we'll cover that, and then we'll go back into resourcing, and I'll make that more structured for you. So you have a nice template of, just like this. This is a template, but I think by the time we structure it a little more, you'll see how this works.
Okay.
Maybe we'll do a little practice after that one. All right, you guys, see you next time.
Thank you.
The best. Bye-bye.
Bye.